World of Warfare presents A Month in the Life of American Airmen During World War II. Taken from the filmmaker's book, Wings of Glory, about the history of the 15th Air Force flying out of 21 airbases in southeastern Italy. The intent of this film is to give viewers a taste of what fighter pilots and heavy bomber crews lived through in World War II, both their victories and life-threatening defeats. Focusing on missions flown in the month of January 1944 and gleaned from individual accounts of those who flew with the 15th, Daily Dose Documentary presents A Month in the Life of American Airmen in the Second World War. America's heavy bombers flew in close formation to one another for their mutual protection from enemy fighters. However, on January 11, 1944, on a mission to Piraeus, Greece, the practice turned deadly in the pea soup conditions nearing the target. Bomber-on-bomber and fighter-on-fighter collisions occurred repeatedly over the operational life of the 15th. But on January 11, miserable weather hampered the mission, forcing one-third of the bombers and all the escorting P-38 Lightnings from the 14th Fighter Group to turn back before they reached the target. The rest of the bomber stream forged ahead until disaster struck hard for airmen of the 301st Bomb Group. The nose of Richard Williams' B-17 collided with another plane, ripping off the entire front end of Williams' plane. Only 3 of the crew managed to bail out before the doomed ship hit the ground. Another fortress, this one flown by Wayne Cherrington, collided with yet another fortress, just moments after Cherrington announced, "I'm going to get above this cloud cover if it's the last thing I do." His proclamation turned out to be a truthful omen when his plane broke in two after the collision. The radioman and 2 gunners were the only survivors. Disaster continued for the 301st when Donald Reedy's fortress broke apart after a collision. Only the navigator, Aaron Siegel, and the radio operator, Samuel Shersky, managed to survive. The last plane to go down with the 301st that day, in yet another collision, flown by Joseph Dunbar, managed no survivors. Also participating in the raid on Piraeus was the 97th Bomb Group, which lost 2 planes when they collided with each other. The crew of Herbert Easterling's fortress all perished, while 3 men inside Roy Mayo's plane managed to get out safely when their bomber broke apart in midair. The final loss to collisions that day was Joseph Donahue's plane, flying with the 99th Bomb Group, which flipped over on its back after colliding with another bomber, losing a wing as it began a death spiral toward the ground. 3 men made it out safely before the plane hit the ground. Greek civilians buried most of the dead crewmen, where some of the surviving airmen were able to attend the funerals. All surviving airmen managed to evade capture with the help of Greek resistance fighters, returning to Italy in March and April of 1944. Losses continued from events not related to enemy interdiction when on January 14th, the 449th Bomb Group flew its 4th mission to Mostar in current-day Bosnia-Herzegovina. A liberator named Blind 8, flown by Vincent Iskrig, accidentally dropped its bombs on White Fang, flown by Harold Picard. 2 bombs hit White Fang's nose turret, while a third went through White Fang's wing, which set the fuel tanks on fire. Flight leader John Wood heard a muffled explosion and looked out the window of his cockpit moments after White Fang was struck. He looked away for a moment to let his mind catch up with the growing disaster, and when he looked again, he saw the tail section break cleanly from the doomed ship. White Fang's tail gunner, Robert Hansen, and a photographer assigned for the mission, Charles Lamarca, managed to bail out of the crippled plane. Hansen went out through a hole in the fuselage near the tail, while Lamarca simply jumped out where the missing tail should have been. Both men spent the rest of the war in German prison camps. After White Fang exploded due to bombs from his own plane, Isrig had trouble controlling his plane and was forced to fall out of formation. Sustaining damage to the bomb bay, Blind Date began to lose altitude, prompting Isgrig to give the bailout order. As a result, the co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, and engineer unhooked their headphones and headed for the bomb bay. Isgrig managed to regain control of the aircraft. However, since the crew in the bomb bay could no longer hear the intercom, they bailed out before Isgrig could rescind the order. Isgrig and the remaining gunners from the rear of the plane managed to land safely back at their base, while two men, Bombardier Stanley Grizik and radio operator Otaro Tosti, were safely rescued by Chetnik partisans. The three other crewmen landed farther away than the Chetniks could reach in time, and they spent the rest of the war as German POWs. On the same mission to Mostar, the 82nd Fighter Group flew its first mission out of its new base in Foggia. As the formation of B-24s left the target, more than a dozen Me-109s bounced the stream of liberators, flying with the 97th Bomb Group. Paul Jorgensen and his wingmen were jumped as they made a slow turn, forcing them to dive steeply away from the attacking Messerschmitts. We were hitting 550 miles an hour on the way down, Jorgensen remembered, and I thought my airplane was going to fall apart. He blacked out due to the rising G-forces, coming to just in time to pull his P-38 out of its dive. By then, another Me-109 had locked onto his wingman's tail, so Jorgensen outmaneuvered the Messerschmitt until he could shoot it down. After the kill, a second Me-109 attached itself on his tail and made clean hits on both Jorgensen's wings and boom and cowling around the right supercharger. In a display of bold determination, Jorgensen managed to escape death by out-turning his opponent. His P-38, named Betty May after his wife, was badly damaged, but managed to bring him home safely. The day's combat brought Jorgensen his third and final confirmed kill of his tour of duty. On the attrition side of the quotient, two P-38 pilots died in the action. Known as the Checkertails or simply the Clan, the 325th Fighter Group saw action on January 21st during fighter sweeps about 20 miles southeast of Florence, Italy. The Checkertails were flying at 15,000 feet when future ace Raymond Hartley Jr. heard William Elliott call out bogeys at 11 o'clock. After squadron leader Anthony Turk Jr. instructed Elliott to go after what appeared to be 6 FW-190s, Hartley led his flight down with Elliott's. The airplanes were FW-190s, Hartley recalled, painted dark blue on top and light blue underneath. There were 5 or 6 flying south in a line abreast formation at about 10,000 feet, and we peeled off after them when they were almost directly beneath us. Lieutenant Elliott's flight went after the left-hand 3, and I led my flight after the right-hand 2. I selected the one on the left as my target. Elliott's flight, being ahead of us, opened fire, and the FW-190s started split-S-ing. I saw one roll over and up, trailing smoke and fire, and moments later a chute opened. My FW did a split-S and then a half roll, and I was able to follow him through both maneuvers, despite the fact that my fighter was still carrying its wing tanks. I finally released my wing tanks as we pulled out of the dive at 2,000 feet. I then forgot to switch to my main tank and momentarily lost speed when the engine was briefly starved of fuel. Another P-47 now got out in front of me in pursuit of the FW. We chased the enemy fighter down to the deck and quite a ways south. The lead P-47 fired several bursts, and I thought I observed several explosions along the wing of the FW, although I was well behind and it was hazy. Then the lead P-47 broke off the chase, banking away to the left despite me calling him to keep going. I continued the chase, although the FW pilot was weaving as if to look behind him. I apparently took my opponent by surprise when I fired from close range. I scored hits along the left wing and bottom of the fuselage. The FW started a long climbing turn to the right and I adjusted my lead and observed hits on top of the fuselage. The FW then rolled slowly onto its back, and a large sheet of flame came out of its belly at the wing root. The pilot then split-esed into the ground from about 100 feet. On January 21, 1944, Allied troops stormed the beaches of Anzio, Italy, digging in their first foothold in an effort to drive Axis forces out of Rome. The following day, on a strafing mission near the town of Frosinone, east of Anzio, flying a P-38 twin-engine fighter with the 14th Fighter Group, Paul Wingert's plane suffered flak hits despite his attempts at evasive action. Damage to his plane appeared to be minor, but he broke from the others in his flight and gained altitude to ping a signal from Big Fence, the 15th's radio beacon direction finder, which gave him a heading for Allied lines. Enemy anti-aircraft gunners continued to track him with 37mm flak guns, forcing Wingert to dive for a low altitude, thereby dodging their aim. Instead, Wingert met a bundle of TNT coming up, which shook his plane violently. Smoke poured out of one of his engines, forcing him to shut it down and feather the prop. Yet when smoke began pouring into his cockpit, he decided it was time to bail out before the plane exploded. I immediately pulled the emergency canopy release and started out, he recalled. However, I was going awfully fast. As Wingert attempted to clear the cockpit, the slipstream pinned him to the fuselage. Climbing back in his cockpit, he slowed the plane before attempting a second bailout. I remember just faintly that the fire came up in my face, he recalled, but his flight gear, goggles, and oxygen mask saved him from the flames. He fell face first toward the earth for a time, struggling to raise his arms against the slipstream. When he finally managed to pull his ripcord, the cord came away without opening his parachute. Wingert attempted to pull his parachute free by hand, but when it finally came out, several shrouds wrapped around his legs. Figuring his life was over, Wingert looked up to check the condition of his parachute, finding a streamer of white collapsed and flapping in the breeze. The chute finally blossomed open, and he drifted down toward a soldier's bivouac, uncertain at first whether the soldiers were Allied or Axis. Drifting ever closer to the ground, Wingert finally made out U.S. Army tents, which brought instant relief that he was coming down on the right side of the front line. Pulling on his shrouds to avoid hitting a tree, Wingert coasted down to the ground to be greeted by American GIs and a handful of Italian girls. Wingert had come down mere feet from the GI's chow line, and after he gathered up his parachute, he joined the soldiers for a nice hearty meal, as if nothing life-threatening had ever occurred. January 30th proved to be a historic day for fighter pilots flying with the 15th, achieving a kill record that remained unbroken throughout World War II. Arriving in advance of the bomber stream for a planned attack on Udine, Italy, the Checkertails witnessed an assortment of enemy aircraft ascending for a fight with a stream of B-17s. For the next 35 minutes, the Checkertails battled it out with 8 types of enemy fighters, bombers, transports, and liaison planes. Herschel Green attacked a group of tri-motored Junkers 52s in his P-47 Thunderbolt, knocking down 4 aircraft in a single pass. He then gave chase to a Macchi 202, flying at treetop level, finally downing the plane after a 35-minute chase. Rejoining his flight, Green's 6th kill of the day was on a Dornier bomber, which made him the 15th's first ace, as well as its first ace in a day. During the remaining months of the war, only 2 other pilots achieved such status. In all, 18 Checkertails claimed 37 kills in one day, with a loss of 2 of their own. Meanwhile, Lightnings from the 82nd Fighter Group tangled with aggressive Messerschmitts while escorting a stream of Liberators, claiming 6 kills on a day, bringing the 15th's one-day total to 45 kills.